Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. As a matter of fact, for quite some time, we people have been fed on the mistaken notion that trade deficits are bad. And nothing can be farther from the truth. The reality is that international trade deficits are not a bad thing at all. It is the politicians who have not even the basic knowledge of economics, in a fit of populism, try to mislead people and tell them, okay, our opponents are indulging in deficit. The country is going to suffer and they are bad. Nowadays, there's a buzzword of globalization. And trade deficits are supposed to be against the basic form of globalization, which means spreading of poverty all over, not spreading of prosperity. Let's be very clear. The underdeveloped countries need to be developed. But since when is it the responsibility of the developed countries to ensure that they develop? Politics is not basically enabling others, it's enabling yourself. And only after your country has reached that level can you give aid, but not that makes the other country more powerful. And when I look at the trade deficit, say of USA, I'm taking that as a matter of fact as a prime example, being the most developed country, having the largest economy. It has a trade deficit. For example, in 2017, it had a trade deficit of $372 billion with China. It has with Mexico, Japan, Vietnam, even Ireland, it had a trade deficit. Malaysia, India, South Korea, name it. And with each country, it had a trade deficit. And the politicians used to say it's bad. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the justifications being used for the trade war. Now, trade war is not bad again. Trade war means protecting the production of your country. It's a comparative advantage. Most of the first-time budding economists or politicians posing as economists learn the principle of comparative advantage. They have to. But they cannot use it. They cannot even think of how to use it. A country has a comparative advantage when it can produce a product or a service more cheaply than the others. Now, China is producing practically all consumer goods or technology goods much more cheaply than any other country in the world can. Whether they subsidize the workers, the production, whether they subsidize the infrastructure, whether they give other benefits, but the cost of production, including the wages, are much too low and they can much cheaper. So, other countries would automatically suffer who buy the product. The deficit would be in favor of the buying countries. There'll be more deficit, and China would not have a deficit. Now, USA specializes in producing wheat. It produces wheat much cheaper than Japan can, for example. But Japan can produce cars cheaper for the same reason. Now, specialization in the trade allows consumers in both the countries to buy more wheat and more corn. So the deficit might be there, but ultimately both countries are gaining depending on their specialization and their capacity to produce their product or services more cheaply. As a matter of fact, when the countries trade with each other, then both stand to gain. Whether the country has a deficit trade or surplus trade, both are gaining. But one thing, deficit trade is welcome. Deficit balance of payment is not. So here, the politicians fail to understand the difference in the two. Deficit trade does not necessarily mean deficit in the payments. You produce X item and you export it, but the cost of that X item might be $1 billion. You import other things and the cost may be just a few $100s. So the balance of payment would be in favor of that country which is exporting one product, but the trade deficit would be there because it's exporting less. That is the reason countries like Malaysia and Philippines and even India, most of the countries of Africa have been importing garbage. The two recent things, Philippines and today morning only Malaysia, have warned Canada not to send plastic garbage. Now, what those countries used to do is they would recycle it. The cost of recycling here in Canada is much more than the cost of export, the transportation, the forwarding charges, the insurance, everything combined is still cheaper for them. For Canada, it's much cheaper to sell it. Now, the balance of payment here would be in favor of those countries for simple reason they are paying much less. But the balance of trade, the deficit, that would not be in favor of that country. So policies that hinder, reduce trade deficit work against the potential gains from the comparative advantage. And the people, the politicians, take advantage of this and to deride even a proper administration, good governance, they say, look, we are running into trade deficit. They never talk about the deficit in payments, in the balance of payments. They are always talking about trade deficit. A country like USA runs on an annual trade deficit with a partner company because they buy more goods and services from the partner than they sell to. But the moment they sell one stealth aircraft, they have got more payment than possibly all the production that they have imported. And thereby hangs the tail. The money flows out of US to the other country in trickles, but it comes in a flood. And that is why USA is more concerned with the high-tech expensive things. And the two major exports of USA are defense, that means arms, aeroplanes, again coupled with defense, but even the civilian ones, Lockheed Martin and Boeing, both are USA. And technology. They are not bothered about exporting pins and needles and the fountain pens. And China is specializing in that. But now China has learned the lesson. And it is also concentrating on high product high value products. Now, this is not the end of the story. The farmers with a trade surplus, let's say in China, are now saving extra, having saving, which they need to put to work. And they are expanding in those areas where they can give a tough competition to countries like Japan, South Korea, and of course USA, which are technological giants. So they have learned the lesson, but many countries have not, like India. They are still trying to concentrate on consumer durables, or not even on durables, but on the services, manpower. They think they're exporting people, immigrants, they send a lot of money in, but they're earning more money. But the totality per unit is much less. So we have to consider that the money flowing out to pay for import flows back to help pay for the product improvement in the new capital. And that is what is required. When you export and the money comes in, don't waste it. Try to utilize it to ensure that the productive investment opportunities increase. And that is why the underdeveloped countries and the undeveloped countries, they are more concerned with day-to-day working. And here is where China took a march. They asked the people to tighten their belts. They were not concerned with the food, they were not concerned with the livelihood. They were concerned with the product which they could export and increase productivity. Enhanced productivity enabled them to become the third and today the second largest economy of the world. And day is not far off when they would have a balance of payment surplus along with trade surplus and would be number one economy. Now, USA is faltering on that point of view, but that's not the end of the story. As a matter of fact, the deficit trade can be a blessing because you can ensure that the deficit will be covered by high priced. No, it's a simple marketing. High volume, low margin, or high margin, low volume. So if you have, the ideal is to have high margin, high volume, but that may not be possible in day-to-day affairs. In 2017, for example, USA bought $552 billion worth of products from abroad. But they did not sell worth 552, they sold worth $2,000 billion. So the trade deficit was there, but the balance of payment was much more in favor of USA. And the foreigners sent their money right back to USA, enabled USA to build more factories, create more jobs and increase growth. And this is where Trump had an advantage. He did what Obama failed to do, that he increased both the volume and the totality, volume of the trade and the increase in profits. And as a result, is taking advantage of the political situation. Excuse me. In general, trade imbalances are driven by the market forces and reflect not the trade, not the economy, but they reflect borrowing and lending across the globe. And this major aspect is not revealed to the people. So while it's important to consider the consequences of international trade for inequality and distribution of gains over trade, there is no guarantee ever that the gains would be evenly distributed. Trade deficits create a problem. Now, when they create a problem, there is a situation when the deficits are due to government borrowing in the countries with weak economies and political institutions, like what has happened in Pakistan. It's practically become bankrupt. And if the doors are not given to it, it will have to fold up. It's a sikka. Because of the weak political situations, weak economic institutions, or in smaller countries like Burkina Faso, where free capital flow is destabilizing. So in those two conditions, trade deficit is bad. But for well-functioning economies like USA, like China, like India, they are not an inherent problem. As a matter of fact, these countries are better off with trade deficits than with imposing tariffs. And it is trade deficits that make America great. And its trade deficit, properly handled, can make any country move forward without any problem. The only thing is, you have to take the blinkers off and look at economy with fresh eyes, with fresh ideas, and not be scared by these fear-mongering politicians who gave trade deficit a bad name, which is not bad at all. Thank you. And before I say au revoir till tomorrow, please let me tell you that many times, because of the technical difficulty as it happened today, in case I cannot start at 8, as soon as the technical difficulty is resolved, I'll be there to meet you, to talk to you. Thank you.